The smell of roasted meat filled the air as little dragon claws clicked against the stone floor. Ember had never been this deep in the fortress before, but his nose led him down corridor after corridor until he found the source of the wonderful smells. The kitchen doors were tall and heavy, but they stood open to let the heat escape. Steam rose from giant pots while flames danced under metal pans. Strange creatures moved around the kitchen with quick steps. Some had 4 arms, others had blue skin, and a few looked almost like the dragons but much smaller. In the middle of all this busy work stood a creature Ember had heard about but never seen up close. A human. The human was not very tall, maybe twice the height of Ember's small dragon body. His skin was pale pink, and he had short brown hair that stuck to his head with sweat. He wore white clothes that had many stains from food and cooking. But what caught Ember's attention was how smoothly the human moved. His hands flew over the food like he was performing magic. Ember watched from the doorway as the human cut vegetables into perfect pieces. The knife moved so fast it was just a silver flash, but every piece came out exactly the same size. Then, the human grabbed a hot pan with his bare hand and flipped something inside it high into the air before catching it perfectly back in the pan. "Wow," Ember whispered, his young voice making a small puff of smoke come from his nose. The human looked up and saw the little dragon watching him. For a moment, fear flashed across his face, but then he saw how small and young Ember was. The fear changed to surprise and then to something that might have been a smile. "Hello there, little one," the human said, his voice gentle. "You shouldn't be in here. The kitchen can be dangerous." Ember took a step closer, his golden eyes wide with curiosity. "Are you really a human? My father told me about your kind, but I've never seen one before." The human set down his knife and wiped his hands on his apron. "Yes, I am. My name is David. What's yours?" "I'm Ember," the little dragon said, moving closer to get a better look. "My father is Lord Crimson. He sits on the council." David's eyes went wide for a moment. He quickly bowed his head. "An honor to meet you, young Lord Ember." "Just Ember is fine," the little dragon said, climbing up on a wooden crate to get a better view of what David was doing. "What are you making? It smells amazing." David looked relieved at Ember's casual attitude. "I'm preparing the evening meal for the council members. This is roasted beast meat with fire root vegetables. Your kind seems to enjoy dishes with strong, spicy flavors." Ember watched as David went back to his cooking. The human reached for a pot of boiling water, and as he did, his white sleeve rolled up his arm. What Ember saw made his young heart skip a beat. The human's arm was covered in marks. Some were white lines that looked old. Others were pink and newer looking. There were round marks that looked like burns, and long, thin marks that looked like cuts. The marks went up his arm as far as Ember could see under the rolled sleeve. "David," Ember said quietly, "what happened to your arm?" David looked down at his exposed arm and quickly pulled his sleeve back down. "Oh, these? They're just from cooking. Kitchens can be dangerous places. Burns from hot pans, cuts from knives. It comes with the job." But Ember's dragon senses were much sharper than those of other species. He could smell David's emotions, and right now the human reeked of fear and sadness. These weren't just cooking accidents. Ember was young, but he wasn't stupid. "All of them?" Ember asked, tilting his head to one side the way young dragons did when they were confused. David turned back to his cooking, but his movements weren't as smooth anymore. His hands shook slightly as he stirred a pot. "Yes, all of them. Like I said, cooking can be dangerous." Ember hopped down from his crate and moved closer to David. The human's smell of fear got stronger, but there was something else too. Loneliness. Deep, aching loneliness that made Ember's young heart hurt. "Can I see?" Ember asked softly. "See? What?" "Your arms. I promise I won't hurt you. Dragons don't hurt the people who cook for them." David stopped stirring and looked down at the little dragon. In Ember's golden eyes he saw only curiosity and concern, not the cruel interest he had learned to fear from others. After a long moment he set down his spoon and slowly rolled up both sleeves. Ember gasped. Both of David's arms were covered in scars, Some were clearly from kitchen work, the round burns from hot pans, the straight cuts from knife accidents. But others were different. These scars were too neat, too deliberate. They formed patterns that no kitchen accident could make. "Who did this to you?" Ember asked, his voice barely a whisper. David's hands trembled as he rolled his sleeves back down. "It doesn't matter now. I'm safe here. The dragons treat their kitchen staff well." "But someone hurt you before," Ember said. It wasn't a question. David knelt down so he was eye level with the little dragon. Up close, Ember could see that David's eyes held years of pain that no one so young should have to carry. "Yes," David said simply. "But that's over now. I came here to start fresh. And your people have been good to me. I can cook without fear, and I can send money home to my family on Earth." "Your family?" "My wife and daughter. They live in the human settlements. The money I earn here helps them have a better life." Ember felt something burning in his chest. That wasn't dragonfire. It was anger, but not the quick, hot anger dragons were known for. This was something deeper, colder. Someone had hurt this gentle person who made such wonderful food and spoke so kindly to a strange little dragon. "The scars that aren't from cooking," Ember said carefully. "Where did you get them?" David was quiet for a long time. Around them, the kitchen noise continued, but their small corner felt separate from everything else. Finally, David spoke, his voice so soft Ember had to lean forward to hear him. "I used to work on a space station in the outer colonies. The overseers there believed that humans worked better when they were afraid. They used pain to keep us in line." Ember's golden eyes blazed. "They tortured you," David flinched at the word. "It was just how things were. Humans aren't considered very important in most parts of the galaxy. We're short-lived, we're not very strong physically, and there are so many of us that losing a few doesn't matter much to most species." "It matters to me," Ember said fiercely. David stared at the little dragon in amazement. In 3 years of working for the dragons, none of them had ever asked about his scars. They were polite and fair employers, but they kept their distance. This small hatchling was the first being to show genuine concern for his pain. "Thank you," David whispered. And for the first time since Ember had met him, his smile looked real. 3 days had passed since Ember first met David in the kitchen. The little dragon couldn't stop thinking about the scars on the human's arms and the smell of old fear that clung to him like smoke. Every morning, Ember found excuses to visit the kitchen, usually around the time when the other staff took their breaks and David worked alone. David seemed to enjoy the company. He would show Ember how to prepare different dishes, explain the spices that came from distant worlds, and tell stories about the strange foods humans ate on Earth. But whenever Ember asked about the scars, David would change the subject or find urgent work that needed his attention. Today felt different. David was preparing a simple meal for the kitchen staff, just soup and bread, and his movements were slower than usual. He kept pausing to stare at nothing, and Ember could smell sadness rolling off him in waves. "David," Ember said from his usual perch on the wooden crate. "Are you okay?" The human looked up, startled. He had been so lost in thought he'd forgotten the little dragon was there. "Oh yes, I'm fine, just tired." But Ember's sharp senses told him otherwise. David smelled like sadness and memory, the way the old dragons smelled when they talked about battles from long ago. Something had brought the human's painful past back to the surface. "What were you thinking about?" Ember asked gently. David stirred the soup slowly, watching the steam rise from the pot. "Today marks 4 years since I left the station where I got these scars," he said, holding up one scarred arm. "I was just remembering." Ember waited patiently. He had learned that humans, unlike dragons, often needed time to find their words when talking about painful things. "You really want to know, don't you?" David asked after a long silence. Ember nodded. "I want to understand. Someone hurt you, and I don't understand why anyone would hurt someone who makes such good food and is so nice." David let out a sound that might have been laughter, but it had no joy in it. "You're very innocent, Ember. That's not a bad thing, but it makes this hard to explain." The human sat down on a stool near Ember's crate, bringing them to the same height. The station where I worked was run by a species called the Sorians. They look a bit like your people, but smaller and with different scales. They controlled several human colonies and used us for labor. Like servants? Ember asked. More like tools, David said bitterly. Tools that could think and work, but tools nonetheless. The Sorians believed that humans worked best when they were scared. They said fear made us more careful, more obedient. Ember's small claws dug into the wooden crate. What did they do? David rolled up his sleeve again, pointing to a neat line of round scars on his forearm. These are from punishment sessions. If you made a mistake or if they thought you weren't working hard enough, they would heat metal rods and press them against your skin. One burn for each offense. The little dragon's eyes went wide with horror. They burned you on purpose? Yes. And these, David moved his finger to trace the straight-line scars, are from their claws. Sorians have very sharp claws, and they would use them to mark humans who talked back or broke rules. They said the scars would remind us to be better servants. Ember felt the fire building in his chest again, hotter this time. How many humans were there? On my station? About 200. But there were dozens of stations like mine throughout Sorian space. Thousands of humans, all marked like cattle to show we belonged to them. Why didn't you fight back? David's smile was sad and tired. Some tried. The punishment for fighting back was death, usually in front of all the other humans, as an example. And even if we could have fought, where would we go? Space is big and cold, and humans can't survive long without ships and supplies. Ember tried to imagine being trapped somewhere, hurt every day, with no way to escape. It made his young heart ache. How did you get away? I was lucky, David said. A dragon trade ship stopped at our station for supplies. I was assigned to help prepare food for the dragon crew. One of them tasted my cooking and asked who had made it. When they brought me forward, the dragon captain saw my scars and asked about them. David's voice got stronger as he continued. The Sorian overseer tried to lie, said they were cooking accidents. But the dragon captain was old and smart. He could smell the fear on all the humans, could see that our scars were too neat to be accidents. He made an offer to buy my contract. Buy you? Ember was confused. In Sorian law, humans are property that can be bought and sold. The dragon captain paid for my contract and brought me here to work in the fortress kitchens. Your people don't buy and sell humans, so once I was here, I was free. Ember thought about this for a long moment. Are all humans treated like this? Not all, but many. Humans are still new to the galaxy. We only discovered space travel a few centuries ago, which is nothing compared to species like yours that have been traveling the stars for thousands of years. Most other species see us as young and weak. Some, like your people, treat us with respect. Others, like the Sorians, see us as resources to be used up. But you're not weak, Ember protested. You make beautiful food. You work harder than anyone in this kitchen, and you're kind to a little dragon who bothers you with questions every day. David reached out and gently patted Ember's small head. Thank you for saying that. But physical, strength and military power are what most species respect. Humans have neither in large amounts. What about your family? Are they safe? They live in one of the human settlements near Earth. It's not paradise, but it's much better than the stations. The money I send them helps them have a decent life. My daughter is learning to read and write, something I never got to do until I was much older. Ember's golden eyes blazed with an idea. Could they come here, to the dragon worlds? David shook his head sadly. Travel between star systems is expensive, and dragon space is far from human settlements. Besides, your people have been kind to me, but I don't know if they would welcome a human family. They would if I asked them to, Ember said with the confidence that only a young dragon could have. David smiled, this time with real warmth. You're a good friend, Ember, but the galaxy is complicated. Your people have their own concerns, their own problems to solve. My father always says that helping others makes you stronger, not weaker, Ember said stubbornly. Your father sounds like a wise dragon. He is. He's the wisest dragon on the council. Maybe I should tell him about the Sorians and what they did to you. David's smile disappeared, replaced by fear. No, Ember, Please don't. I'm happy here. I don't want to cause trouble or make anyone angry. If the council thinks I'm a problem, they might send me away." But Ember was already lost in thought. His father had always taught him that dragons protected those who served them. How could they protect humans if they didn't know humans were being hurt? The little dragon made a decision that would change everything, though he didn't know it yet. "I won't get you in trouble," Ember promised. "But my father should know about this. All dragons should know." David looked at the determined expression on the little dragon's face and felt a mix of hope and terror. He had learned not to expect help from anyone, but Ember's innocent faith was infectious. Maybe, just maybe, the dragons could do something about the humans suffering in Sorian space. Or maybe he had just made the biggest mistake of his life by trusting a child with his secrets. Lord Crimson was reviewing trade agreements in his private study when his son burst through the doors without knocking. The ancient dragon looked up from his scrolls with mild irritation, but his expression softened when he saw the determination burning in Ember's golden eyes. "Father, I need to talk to you about something very important," Ember announced, his small chest puffed out with the seriousness of his mission. "Oh? And what matter of great importance brings my son to interrupt council business?" Lord Crimson asked, setting aside his work with an amused smile. Ember scrambled up onto the chair across from his father's massive desk. Even sitting, Lord Crimson towered over the young dragon, his red scales gleaming like polished metal in the firelight. His eyes, ancient and wise, held the patience that came from centuries of dealing with the problems of younger creatures. "It's about the humans, Father. Specifically about David, the human who works in our kitchens." Lord Crimson's expression grew more serious. Dragons took the treatment of their staff very seriously, and any problem with a kitchen worker could affect the entire fortress. "Has he done something wrong, failed in his duties?" "No, Father, the opposite. He's wonderful at his job and he's very kind, but someone hurt him before he came here and I think you need to know about it." The older dragon leaned back in his chair. He had noticed the human chef, of course. David was skilled and reliable, never causing problems or complaints. But Lord Crimson had never paid much attention to him beyond that. Kitchen staff were supposed to be invisible, competent, and quiet. "What kind of hurt?" he asked, though he expected to hear about some minor workplace accident or perhaps a family dispute. "The Sorians tortured him," Ember said bluntly. "They burned him and cut him with their claws because they said it made humans work better when they were scared." Lord Crimson went very still. The ancient dragon had lived through many wars and seen much cruelty, but the casual torture of servants was not something he associated with civilized species. "That's a very serious accusation, son. Are you certain of your facts?" "I saw the scars, Father. They're not from cooking accidents, they're too neat, too deliberate. And David told me about the station where he worked, where hundreds of humans were marked like cattle." The old dragon's eyes began to glow with an inner fire. "Show me, Father. Take me to this human. I want to see these scars myself." Ember led his father through the corridors of the fortress, his small claws clicking rapidly on the stone floor as he tried to match Lord Crimson's massive strides. Other dragons and staff members pressed themselves against the walls as the council member passed, bowing deeply in respect and fear. They found David in the kitchen preparing the evening meal. He looked up when they entered and immediately dropped. To one knee, his head bowed low. "Lord Crimson, it's an honor." "Rise," the dragon commanded, his deep voice echoing off the kitchen walls. "My son tells me you have scars that were not earned in this kitchen." David shot a panicked look at Ember, who gave him an encouraging nod. "My lord, I don't wish to cause any trouble. The trouble was not of your making. Show me your arms." With shaking hands, David rolled up his sleeves. The other kitchen workers had gathered at a respectful distance, curious about why a council member had come to their domain. Lord Crimson stepped forward and studied the human's arms with the careful attention of a dragon, examining a precious artifact. The ancient dragon had seen battle scars, accident marks, and the natural injuries that came from a lifetime of hard work. These were different. These spoke of deliberate cruelty, of systematic torture designed to break a spirit rather than simply punish a mistake. "How many humans bore marks like these on the station where you worked?" Lord Crimson asked, his voice carefully controlled. "All of us, my lord." The Sorian said unmarked humans were untrustworthy. They marked us within days of our arrival. "And how many humans were there?" "About 200 on my station. But there were many stations throughout Sorian space." Lord Crimson felt an emotion he hadn't experienced in decades. Shock. Not at the cruelty itself, but at his own ignorance. How had he not known that thousands of humans were being systematically tortured just beyond Dragon space? "You may return to your work," he told David, then turned to address the other kitchen staff. "What you have heard stays in this room. Speak of it outside these walls and you will answer to me personally." The staff bowed and quickly dispersed, sensing the Dragon Lord's dangerous mood. Lord Crimson strode from the kitchen with Ember hurrying to keep up, heading not back to his study but to the council chambers. "Father, where are we going?" "To get answers." The council's intelligence network was vast and efficient. Within hours, Lord Crimson had reports from across the galaxy about human treatment under various species' rule. What he read made his ancient blood burn with rage. The Sorians were not unique in their cruelty. Several species treated humans as disposable labor, using fear and pain to maintain control. Humans were bought and sold like livestock in many sectors, their short lifespans making them seem less valuable than longer-lived species. But it was the numbers that truly stunned him. Conservative estimates put the number of enslaved or abused humans in the millions. Entire generations had grown up knowing nothing but servitude and fear. "How did we not know about this?" he demanded of his intelligence chief, a smaller dragon, whose scales had turned silver with age. "My lord, human affairs have never been considered strategically important. They have no significant military power, no rare resources we need, and no political influence. Most species treat them as an internal matter." "Internal matter," Lord Crimson repeated coldly. "Mass torture and enslavement is an internal matter." Our intelligence chief wisely said nothing. Lord Crimson returned to his private study to find Ember waiting for him, curled up in a chair with a worried expression. "What did you find out, father?" The ancient dragon sat heavily in his chair, suddenly, feeling every one of his 1,000 years. "You were right to bring this to my attention, son. The situation is far worse than what happened to David alone." "Worse how?" "There are millions of humans being treated like David was, maybe worse, and we dragons have done nothing because we didn't consider it our problem." Ember's young eyes blazed with fury. "But it is our problem. If someone hurts people who can't defend themselves, the strong people have to help them. That's what being strong means, isn't it?" Lord Crimson stared at his son in amazement. Out of the mouths of hatchlings came wisdom that had escaped ancient dragons. "Yes," he said slowly. "That is exactly what being strong means." "So what are we going to do?" The old dragon was quiet for a long moment, then his eyes began to glow with determined fire. "We're going to remind the galaxy what happens when dragons are truly angry." But even as he made this declaration, Lord Crimson was thinking about something that stunned him more than the human suffering itself. It was Ember's reaction to it. Most dragons would have been angry about the cruelty, yes, but they would have seen it as a distant problem, someone else's concern, not Ember. The young dragon had seen one human's pain and immediately understood it as an injustice that demanded action. He had not hesitated to involve his father, despite David's fears. He had not calculated the political costs or strategic benefits. He had simply seen suffering and decided it must be stopped. When had dragons lost that kind of moral clarity? When had they become so focused on power and politics that they forgot the simple duty of the strong to protect the weak? "Father?" Ember asked, noticing his father's thoughtful expression. "I'm proud of you, son," Lord Crimson said, and meant it more than he had ever meant anything before. "You've reminded me what it truly means to be a dragon." The young dragons gathered in the fortress courtyard like they did every afternoon, but today something was different. Ember sat in the center of the group, his golden eyes serious as he looked at each of his friends. Ruby, with her bright red, Scales tilted her head curiously. Storm, whose blue-gray scales shimmered in the sunlight, flicked his tail impatiently. Even quiet little Pearl, barely bigger than Ember himself, leaned forward to hear what he had to say. "I need to tell you all something important," Ember began, his voice carrying the weight of knowledge that had changed everything for him. "Something about the humans who work in our fortress." "What about them?" Ruby asked. "They make good food and keep things clean. Father says they're useful servants." Ember's claws scraped against the stone beneath him. "They're not just servants. They're people like us, but someone has been hurting them before they came here." The young dragons exchanged confused looks. Storm spoke up, his voice carrying the arrogance that came naturally to dragon youth. "If they're being hurt, they should fight back or fly away. That's what dragons would do." "They can't," Ember said patiently. "Humans can't fly, and they're not as strong as we are. And the ones hurting them are stronger species who keep them trapped." He told them about David's scars, about the Sorian stations where humans were burned and cut for the smallest mistakes. He described the fear that clung to David like old smoke, and the way the humans' hands shook when he talked about his past. Pearl's small voice was barely a whisper. "They hurt him on purpose? Just to make him scared?" "Yes. And not just him. Thousands of humans, maybe millions." The young dragons fell silent, processing this information. They had been raised to understand that strength came with responsibility, but none of them had ever thought about what that meant for weaker species. Ruby was the first to speak. "What can we do? We're just hatchlings." Ember's eyes lit up with the same determination his father had seen. "We can show them they're safe here. We can be kind to them. We can learn about their customs and their food and their families." "My father says getting too close to servants makes them lazy," Storm said, though his voice lacked conviction. "David works harder than anyone in the kitchen, and he's never lazy when I visit him," Ember replied. "Being kind doesn't make humans weak. It makes them want to do better." Over the following days, something remarkable began to happen in the fortress. The young dragons started appearing in places they had never been before. Ruby was found in the laundry rooms, asking the human workers about the cleaning methods they used. Storm appeared in the maintenance areas, watching with fascination as human engineers repaired complex machinery with tools designed for much larger hands. Pearl, despite her shy nature, began visiting the human quarters during rest periods, bringing small gifts of fruit from the dragon gardens. The human workers were initially terrified to receive presents from dragon nobility, but Pearl's gentle manner soon put them at ease. Ember continued his visits to David in the kitchen, but now he brought friends. The young dragons learned to prepare simple human dishes, their claws carefully handling delicate ingredients under David's patient instruction. They asked questions about Earth, about human families, about the foods that humans missed from their homeworld. Most surprising of all, they began to understand the quiet strength that humans possessed. When Ruby burned herself on a hot pan, she roared in pain and rage, her dragon nature demanding she lash out at something. But she watched David treat a similar burn with calm efficiency, applying healing salve and continuing his work without complaint. "How do you do that?" she asked in wonder. "How do you not get angry when you're hurt?" David smiled sadly. "I learned long ago that getting angry at pain doesn't make it stop. You just have to keep going and hope tomorrow is better." The young dragons began to see this resilience in all the human workers. When mistakes were made, humans didn't roar or breathe fire. They apologized, fixed the problem, and worked harder to prevent it from happening again. When the work was difficult, they didn't complain. They helped each other, sharing the burden until the task was complete. "They're so patient," Pearl observed one evening as the young dragons gathered to share what they had learned. "When I make mistakes in my lessons, I get frustrated and my tutor has to calm me down. But the humans just try again until they get it right. And they remember everything," Storm added with grudging admiration. "The human who maintains the air systems knows every pipe and wire in the entire fortress. He taught me more about engineering in one afternoon than my tutors have in months." Ember felt a warm glow in his chest as he listened to his friends. They were beginning to understand what he had discovered about humans, but they were finding their own reasons to respect them. Lord Crimson watched these developments with growing amazement. He had expected his son to lose interest in the human situation once the initial shock wore off, the way young creatures often did with new discoveries. Instead, Ember had sparked something that was spreading through the entire generation of dragon youth. The adult dragons began to notice changes in their children's behavior. The young ones spoke with respect about the human workers, asked thoughtful questions about other species, and showed a level of empathy that surprised their elders. They had also become remarkably well-behaved, as if their interactions with the humans had taught them patience and consideration. "What exactly did you tell them?" Lord Crimson asked his son one evening. "I told them the truth," Ember replied simply. "That being strong means protecting people who can't protect themselves, and that humans are worth protecting. And they believed you. They didn't have to believe me. Once they started talking to the humans, they could see for themselves." Lord Crimson realized that his son had accomplished something remarkable. Without force or commands, without political maneuvering or threats, Ember had changed the attitudes of an entire generation. He had shown them that strength was not just about power, but about how that power was used. "The Council is meeting tomorrow to discuss the human situation," Lord Crimson told his son. "Some members think it's not our concern, that we should focus on dragon affairs." "What do you think?" Ember asked. The ancient dragon looked at his son with pride and something that might have been awe. "I think a young dragon has reminded us all what it means to be worthy of our strength." That night, as Ember slept curled up in his bed, Lord Crimson sat in his study writing letters. Not official council communications, but personal messages to old friends and allies throughout dragon space. He wrote about a human chef with scarred arms and a young dragon who had seen past those scars to the person beneath. He wrote about strength and responsibility, about the duty of the powerful to protect the weak. Most importantly, he wrote about how a hatchling's simple act of kindness had reminded an ancient dragon why they had become strong in the first place. Not to rule over others, but to make sure no one suffered alone in the darkness of an uncaring galaxy. The response that had stunned Lord Crimson was not just Ember's compassion, but his ability to awaken that same compassion in others. The young dragon had started a movement without even realizing it, one that would change how dragons viewed their place in the galaxy forever. The Great Council Chamber had never seen anything quite like the scene unfolding before the assembled dragon lords. Ancient beings who had ruled star systems and commanded fleets of warships sat in respectful silence as a small human stood at the center of their circular chamber, his scarred hand steady as he held a simple wooden spoon. David had been terrified when Lord Crimson requested his presence at a council meeting. He had expected questioning, perhaps punishment for causing trouble by talking to young Ember about his past. Instead, he found himself demonstrating the art of human cooking to the most powerful dragons in the galaxy. "The secret," David explained, his voice growing stronger as he focused on his craft, "is understanding that every ingredient has something valuable to offer. Even the bitter herbs can bring out sweetness and other flavors when used correctly." He added spices to the pot with movements that seemed like a carefully choreographed dance. Each gesture was precise, purposeful, the result of years spent perfecting his skills despite the pain and fear that had marked his earlier life. Lord Crimson watched the other council members as they observed David work. He could see understanding dawning in their ancient eyes. This was not a broken creature begging for mercy. This was an artist, a master of his craft who had maintained his dignity and skill despite years of abuse. "How long did it take you to learn this level of skill?" asked Lady Sapphire, her blue scales gleaming in the chamber's light. 20 years, my lady. I started cooking when I was very young, learned from my mother and grandmother. Even on the Sorian station, I tried to practice when I could, though ingredients were limited. You continued to develop your art even while being tortured? This from Lord Onyx, one of the oldest and most traditional members of the council. David paused, in his stirring considering his answer carefully. Cooking was the one thing they couldn't take from me completely. They could burn my arms and cut my skin, but they couldn't stop me from remembering my grandmother's recipes or thinking of new ways to combine flavors. In a way, it kept me human when everything else was trying to break me down. A murmur went through the assembled dragons. They understood the importance of maintaining one's essential nature in the face of adversity. It was something they respected above all else. "And now?" asked Lady Emerald. "What do you hope for?" "I hope to send enough money home so my daughter can attend school instead of working in the factories. I hope to perfect new recipes that will please your lordships. And someday, I hope to see my family again." Simple hopes, humble dreams, but spoken with quiet dignity that impressed the ancient dragons more than grand speeches or displays of power ever could. After David was dismissed with thanks and a generous bonus for his demonstration, the council chamber erupted in heated debate. Some members argued that human affairs were still not their concern, that they had their own people to protect and govern. Lord Crimson stood to address his fellow council members, his ancient voice carrying the weight of centuries. "I have lived for over 1,000 years. I have seen empires rise and fall, watch species evolve and adapt to the challenges of an ever-changing galaxy. In all that time, I thought I understood what made dragons superior to other species." He paused, letting his words sink in. "I was wrong." The chamber fell silent. Dragons did not admit error lightly, especially not ancient ones in positions of power. I believed our superiority came from our strength, our longevity, our ability to breathe fire and fly between the stars. But my son has taught me something that escaped my notice for a millennium. True superiority comes not from what power you possess, but from how you choose to use it. He gestured toward the door through which David had exited. That human has endured torture that would have driven many of us to madness. He has been marked and scarred and treated as property. Yet, he maintains his dignity, perfects his craft, and speaks of his hopes for the future with quiet courage. "A touching story," interrupted Lord Granite, his gray scales dull with age and cynicism. "But it doesn't change the political realities. Interfering in Sorian affairs could lead to conflict." "Then let there be conflict," Lord Crimson replied, his eyes beginning to glow with inner fire. "What is the point of being strong if we use that strength only to protect ourselves? What legacy do we leave if we ignore the suffering of the innocent because it's politically inconvenient?" Lady Sapphire spoke up, her voice thoughtful. "What exactly are you proposing?" "I propose we establish the Galactic Protection Accords. Any species that systematically abuses members of another species will face dragon intervention. We will offer sanctuary to refugees, provide protection to the vulnerable, and make it clear that the age of unopposed cruelty is over." "The cost would be enormous," Lord Onyx pointed out. "Ships, resources, personnel. And for what? To protect humans who offer us nothing in return?" Lord Crimson smiled, thinking of Ember and his friends learning patience from human teachers, discovering new ways to solve problems through human ingenuity. "They offer us something invaluable. They remind us who we used to be, who we could become again." The debate continued for hours, but the outcome was never really in doubt. One by one, the council members were swayed by Lord Crimson's arguments and their own observations of the humans in their service. They had seen the quiet dignity, the resilience, the capacity for hope in the face of despair. Most importantly, they had seen the effect these humans had on their own children. The young dragons had become more thoughtful, more compassionate, more aware of their responsibilities to others. If contact with humans could produce such positive changes in dragon youth, perhaps there was value in protecting them beyond simple moral obligation. When the vote was called, it was unanimous. The Dragon Council would propose the Galactic Protection Accords to the wider galactic community. They would offer sanctuary to abused humans and other vulnerable species, and they would make it clear that cruelty toward the defenseless would no longer be tolerated. 3 months later, David stood in the same council chamber, but this time he was not alone. His wife Sarah and his 10-year-old daughter Emma stood beside him, their eyes wide with wonder at the magnificent dragons surrounding them. "My lord," David said, bowing deeply to Lord Crimson, I cannot express my gratitude for bringing my family here safely. The gratitude is ours, Lord Crimson replied. You and your family will serve as our first ambassadors to the human communities. Your task will be to identify others who need sanctuary, and to help us understand human customs and needs. Emma, overcome by curiosity, stepped forward and asked, Are you really 1,000 years old? Lord Crimson chuckled, a sound like distant thunder. Indeed I am, young one. Wow, you must have seen everything. I thought I had, the ancient dragon replied, glancing at his son who sat proudly nearby. But recently I learned there are still new things to discover. New ways of seeing the world that can only come from the eyes of the young, and the wisdom of those who have suffered, yet maintained their hope. Later, in his private study, Lord Crimson sat with Ember as they reviewed reports from across Dragon, space. Human refugees were arriving daily, bringing with them skills, knowledge, and perspectives that enriched Dragon society in unexpected ways. Father, Ember said, looking up from a report about a human engineer who had solved a centuries-old problem with the fortress ventilation system. Do you think we're doing the right thing? I think we're finally doing what dragons should have been doing all along, Lord Crimson replied. Using our strength to make the galaxy a better place for everyone, not just ourselves. And the other species? The ones who don't like our new policies? Lord Crimson's eyes glowed with ancient fire. They're learning that dragons have not forgotten how to be truly dangerous when the situation requires it. The Sorians, in particular, have discovered that their treatment of humans has consequences they never anticipated. Ember smiled, satisfied. Good. David deserves to know his people are safe. We all deserve to live in a galaxy where strength protects rather than oppresses, Lord Crimson agreed. You've reminded us all of that truth. As news of the Dragon Protection Accord spread throughout the galaxy, species after species joined, the coalition dedicated to protecting the vulnerable. The humans, no longer seen as disposable labor, but as valued partners, began to thrive in ways that surprised everyone. And in the fortress kitchen, David continued to cook, his scarred hands, now symbols not of suffering endured but of strength that could not be broken. His daughter Emma played with young dragons in the courtyard, learning their games while teaching them human songs. The galaxy had learned an important lesson from the smallest and seemingly weakest of its inhabitants. True strength was not about the power to destroy, but about the wisdom to protect, nurture, and lift others up. And sometimes the greatest teachers came in the most unexpected forms.